All right, folks, today we're going to be learning about functions a little bit more. In specific, we're going to be talking about pre-built functions, the functions that VB, Visual Basic, already has programmed into it, so you don't have to write your own. To do that, we're going to learn how to define a function and give an example of how they're used. We're going to learn about two specific functions. One's the rand function, RND, to generate random numbers, and the round function, math.round, that's going to help us to round numbers. All right, so for starters, since functions usually have arguments, we're going to use a little bit of review for arguments, and then we'll learn about what a function is, and we'll do a couple of examples with rand and round. All right, so what are arguments again? We learned about this yesterday. An argument is just a piece of data that is passed to a subroutine, and we're going to learn also to functions, to be used within its code. So it's a little piece of info that we're passing to a subroutine to help it out. So, for example, let's say I want to have I've written my own subroutine. It's called cube message box because it's going to take a number, and you'll see I've written by val and then number as decimal. This is my argument as I'm defining it, and I'm going to cube it. So I have the private subroutine cube message box is going to take this number and spit it out, cube it in a message box. And I'm passing this number as an argument. Okay, so I just take that number and cube it and stick it in a message box. And that's my whole subroutine. So all this does is cube the number and spit it out in a message box. And what's important about this is it has an argument. It's called number, and it's getting passed in by its value as a decimal. So we throw this number in, and it gets cubed and spit back out. So there's two parts to every subroutine. First, the subroutine's code itself, and then we also have to call the subroutine. So somewhere else in the code, I could say cube message box of 3, and then what will come out? Well, a message box that says 3 cubed, of course, is 27. I could say a cube message box of some other piece of data, that's something in a text box. I can say cube message box of some variable that I have. No matter what data I pass to the cube message box, okay, the cube message box will call it number and cube it and spit it out. And that's all there is to it. You're passing this information, whether it's 3, whether it's something from a text box or from a variable. You pass it into this subroutine, and then it cubes it and spits it out in the message box. Okay, so we're just passing information. That's what an argument does. All right, so functions are what we're going to talk about next, and they're very, very similar to subroutines. The difference between a function and a subroutine, even though they're super, super similar, is that a function actually returns a value. That's the key for a function. A subroutine just executes a block of code, right? You say, all right, subroutine, do this. But a function not only executes a block of code, but also spits a number back out. So it's kind of like the opposite of an argument. You put arguments into subroutines or functions, but a function actually spits stuff back out. So let me show you what I mean. A subroutine, okay, cube message box like we had before. These are the ones we just saw, right? You pass some argument in, and that's all you do. You pass it in, and you run the subroutine. A function, on the other hand, okay, you don't just pass a number into it. Let's say we have some function that cubes it, but it actually spits a number back out. So we have to say something is equal to the function, because when it's done, it goes somewhere. It gives you a number. Another example, you could say if cube function of 4 is greater than 50, right? So this, let's say this cube function, which is made up, cubes the number 4. Then we can say, all right, this will do that. It will cube 4 and give you, whatever that is. 4 times 4 is 16 times 4 is 60, 256. And if that's bigger than 50, then, we can say, whoa, that's a big number. But the point is, when we run a function, not only does the function execute some special block of code, and not only can we pass it arguments, but it actually returns a value. In the cube message box, it sent it out in a message box, right? But actually, the function spits it out right back right here, and we can put it right into some other variable or test it in an if statement or anything we want. So I want to show you some examples of some functions that are built into Visual Basic. It actually has a bajillion of these sort of built-in functions. There are lots and lots and lots of them that are already in there. We're going to learn how to write our own functions in the next lesson. For now, we're just going to use them. Okay, and you can use these built-in ones at any time. So one really good example is math.abs, which stands for absolute value. So that gives you the absolute value. If you say math.abs and you put any number in between those parentheses, it'll spit out the absolute value of those numbers. There's math.round, which rounds. We're going to learn about that in a second. There's this RND function, which is built in. We're going to learn about that too. That actually takes no arguments, but it spits out a random number, which is great. And there's a lot of them that deal with strings, pieces of text. So left, actually, if you put 5 in there, it'll take the first 5 letters of something and cut those right out. So there are lots of different functions. These are just examples. But we are going to go in depth on 2 of these functions, rand, which is for random numbers, and math.round, which is for rounding. All right, so rand, R-N-D, here we go. R&D, rand, as I call it, is a function, and you don't put any arguments into it. That's okay, but it always returns a random number between 0 and 1. So, for example, and you can use that along with some math to get any type of number. So, for example, if you wanted to get a message box that returns a number between 0 and 100, well, rand gives us a number between 0 and 1, but if we multiply that by 100, then we'll get a number between 0 and 100. And so if I have a message box that says rand times 100, then I'll get some number between 0 and 1 right here. Okay, and then when it gets multiplied by 100, well, if it was 1, it's 100. If it was 0, it's 0. And if it's any number in between, then it's some number between 0 and 100. So this is going to work perfectly. So again, rand, R-N-D, just gives us a number between 0 and 1. Okay, and we can multiply it by a bigger number if we want to have a larger span, a larger distance. So I'm going to show you real quick how to do this in Visual Basic and do something a little bit more specific. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a random number between 20 and 80 into a text box. So that's a little bit different. Let's see if we can figure that out. All right, so here we are in Visual Basic. I've got a form, okay, and in it I just have one button, and I'm going to add a text box. Here it is. And what we want to do is when we hit the button, we want to have some number between 20 and 80 get displayed, okay? So I can think of how to make a random number. All I have to do is say rand, okay, and that should be just fine. I can say rand times 80, okay? And like I just said before, this should give us a number up to 80, right? If I multiply, let's say R&D turned out it was a random number, it turned out to be 1, then 1 times 80 would be 80. And a little bit less, maybe if it was 0.9, then times 80 would be something a little bit less than 80, okay? Now the problem is this. I can't just say some number times 80 as a line of code. A function like rand returns a value, so we have to put it somewhere. We can't, like a subroutine, we can just call, okay? But a function has to it returns a value. We have to say something is equal to it, okay? So what do we want? We want to put this in the text box, right? Textbox1.text is equal to rand times 80. Now we're almost there, okay? This is telling us, all right, we're going to take a random number between 0 and 1, multiply it by 80, and slap that right in the text box. Let's run it and see what happens. All right, as I press the button, we get a number. It's 56 point something something. And it's between, our goal is to have it between 20 and 80. So that's